I'm not going to lie. People tend to forsake themselves more than they need to. The story follows a boy named Tim, a happy, loved, and joyful child with nothing but innocence in his soul. What was special about Tim is that he was very smart. Straight A student, no less than 9 years old. But being smart and knowing what can happen is not the same thing. The story also follows a man named Sam. Sam had it all at once. A loving wife, 2 kids, and lots of money. However, Sam had a brother who was filled with greed, and that greed consumed him. His brother had a plan. Had his wife cheat on him and left him with his kids. Accused him of domestic violence. Sued him for all his money and left in the dust. Cheated by his brother and left from his beloved wife. He then turned into a balloon of rage, expanding and expanding and expanding. Just when he was ready to pop, he saw a boy playing in the playground named Tim. Sam thought to himself that he was lucky, that he was taking everything for granted, and finally he burst into a rage. He got in his car, grabbed Sam by the neck while no one was looking, pulled him into the back of his van, and drove off. You're probably wondering, why is Sam blaming Tim? Well, if you were in Sam's position, chances are you might do the same thing. You can't blame someone who's not there. So the only thing you can do is blame the person nearest from you. At Sam's apartment, he dragged Tim down in the basement. Tim begging for his life. "Please, mister, don't hurt me. I'll do whatever you say, I promise." Sam said nothing, with a suspenseful look dwelling in his eyes. His mind filled with nothing but accusations toward an innocent boy. He got out his pocket knife, grabbed him by the ear, and slowly skinned it, nearly cutting his entire ear off. Tim screamed, doing nothing but crying and stomping his feet in pain. Dust from the basement floor being sprouted in the air. Sam said nothing. He did nothing. All he did was think. He thought and thought and thought. And finally he came to the conclusion that this boy didn't deserve to live. So what he did was that he grabbed a screwdriver from the toolbox nearly 5 feet away from Tim, resting in dust. He went over to Tim, held him by the neck, and quickly but surely shoved the screwdriver right up his nose. One nostril filled with nothing but iron, the other leaking out from blood. Even his eyes were starting to leak from blood. Sam yanked out the screwdriver. And then what he did next was untold, unseen, unthought of. The very next day, Tim was being digested into Sam's stomach. Two weeks later, a policewoman named Carol was looking for the boy Tim. Anxious to find the young boy and reunite him with his parents, she sought day and night. But one day, while she was on her phone, she saw a man known as Sam. She smiled at him, and he smiled back. She didn't know what to do. All she did was smile at him. Sam decided to sit next to her. Carol thought to herself, what a nice looking man. Nearly bald, blue eyes, pale skin, and a nice brown trench coat. He looked a little suspicious, but Carol didn't care. "How are you today?" she asked. Sam said nothing. All he did was smile. Then a rumble occurred. A rumble occurred in Sam's stomach. But showing no attention to it whatsoever, he just kept staring at Carol, wanting to eat her insides. Carol asked him that day to see a movie with him. He humbly agreed. The following weekend, three more victims have died. Nothing remaining but a pinky finger, a toe, and the collarbone. But that weekend was Carol's night off. And right now, she didn't care. She dressed formally in the rose-like dress, tying her hair up in the bun, putting mascara on, appearances that won't last for an hour. Not when Sam is done with her. Sam, I met her at the door, telling her that she looked beautiful, she slightly blushing. They then drove to see a Bruce Willis movie. The movie was terrible, but they laughed it off. After all, it wasn't for the movie, it was for each other. They were then walking alone in the street, downtown. Carol was wondering to herself of what kind of food he likes. She was thinking about getting him a hot dog or some ice cream. But Sam didn't like ice cream. He didn't like hot dogs. All he wanted was Carol and satisfy his hunger. He then led her in an alleyway, Carol feeling a little nervous, seeing that most guys don't drag beautiful dames in the alleyway. Sam then got out his pocket knife and shanked her 3 times in the stomach. She screamed. Reaching for her phone, Sam slapped it out of her hand and bit her in the throat. Not to make you think this is a vampire thing. He wasn't sucking blood. He was drinking it and chomping on her flesh. Carol then got out her gun, hidden in her purse, and shot 4 times. 3 bullets going into Sam's chest. He then yelled in agonizing pain. Carol was bleeding out and couldn't move, her body going numb. Sam then dragged her body, very angry, into a warehouse nearby. He locked her in, grabbed her by the shoulders, made her lean down, and constantly thrusting his waist into her vagina, practically raping the woman, beating her, chomping on her, wanting for her to die, slowly and painfully. But what he did next was horrific. He tied her up, but before doing so, he cut off her fingers, all 10. And then he forced her to eat her own fingers, shoving them in her mouth, forcing her to chew and swallow. He then moved on to the toes and shoved them in her mouth, next with a foot shoved. Oh, by the time he got to the hands, she finally bled out and died, and the rest was his. All his. 3 months later, the police had finally given up. Sam practically owned the city by now. Being cautious and knowing how the city works came very in handy. Also having friends who also loved to chomp on the flesh of innocent women and children. He then saw him, a man known by Will. Will was a undercover cop, suspecting Sam. He's been looking into his case for days. Sam, unaware of this, he bumps into him. Like that. Will knew what he was getting into and offered to bring him over for to his house and bring him over to his house to watch the football game. Here's the Raiders and Cowboys. Sam humbly agreed, and they went to Will's house. But Sam grew more and more mentally unstable by each meal. He wanted more. He wanted to chomp more. He wanted nothing more to do than eat. He wanted Will. He wanted more children. He wanted more women. He wanted everyone. He wanted to satisfy his hunger. To fill the hole that his wife and brother left. That's all he wanted. By the time they got to Will's house, they watched and laughed over the football game, acting as if they knew each other for years. By the time it was dark, Will then led Sam out of the house, having a great night. Sam then knew he had to take action then and there, so he turned around and chomped on Will's shoulder. Will was quick to action now, so ignoring the pain, he grabbed his gun and shoved it in Sam's skull and pulled the trigger, blood splattering everywhere. You think it was over? You were wrong. Will then got to his knees and crawled to the corpse. He then groped. He then grabbed Sam's hand, and then he ripped it off. And then he bit into the flesh, tearing it off like a chicken bone. No, and Will ate Sam, and then Sam and became digested into Will's stomach. 3 months ago, Will's wife also left him for a man known as Michael Cera. And there was also a great rage into Will's heart. And then he began to fed. He fed himself on not young boys, not women, but animals. You went to farm, eating them raw, tearing their guts apart. Will was the second Sam, possessed by grief. Will then finally died of indigestion 3 years later. And then another took his place. And another. And another. This world began devouring on itself. And then finally, it ended.